I I do this very briefly because I suspect a lot of the points have been covered already. So it will be some more repetition of important fractures. So previously, as Bernie Morey used to say, 2 decades back, the commonest indication used to be rheumatoid arthritis. 90% of his cases were RA. And it is only now recently that 50% of his work is post-fracture sequelae and revision. But the elbow replacement was classically designed for the rheumatoid patient, and that was a low-risk, risk-averse policy and worked. I think Bernie keeps reiterating that the post-traumatic arthritis and osteoarthritis are not the ideal indications for total elbow replacements, especially in the younger set of patients. Uh, Whatever you do, it is important you understand your prosthesis. And I think I would put all my money onto Conrad More. That is the one that's available here in India. Uh, Time tested. Your prosthesis needs to be flanged. Desirable to have the ulna anatomic, so have a left and right ulna. And it's important for to know as a surgeon to understand that you can have a mismatch between the ulna and the humerus. This is rather pertinent in this continent because we have some very small bones, and I don't remember putting in a regular humerus stem or a regular ulna stem. All of them have been small. There has been an occasional regular humeral stem that I put in, but it's been always an extra small for the ulna because the Indian ulna are very, very small. To Amongst all the replacements for joints that we have done, there's been a lot of research, lot of evolution, and we've come to a fair amount of agreement on most of the other prostheses. But the biggest churn has been in elbow replacements because we've seen a lot of generational change between, and they've seen a lot of experimentation to unlinked and linked, and they're still moving. So I don't think there's a lot of moving goalposts. We don't have a fair common settle down to Kunrad More as the golden option because the largest studied stem and a lot of these other stems have become unavailable now. That's embarrassing. Dipti has covered the approaches. It's important, I think, to know two approaches, one with the triceps on and one without. Whether you do the More approach or the Mayo approach, or whether you do a triceps tongue, is depends on how your skills are and how you're trained. So, although we used to do the Campbell's approach previously in England and then moved down to the Mayo approach, I think the tongue approach is coming back into fashion now. That's where you get to keep the triceps insertion intact. So, if the insertion is intact, then you could do the uh, turn down, or you could do the triceps on approach as well. In the fracture scenario, I'm most comfortable doing the triceps on approach as such, but it's important that you understand both approaches of triceps on and triceps off as such because this is dicey. The challenge is in the fracture scenario, I don't think it's such a big deal because with the distal humerus come off, exposure is reasonably okay, but it can be very difficult to prepare the ulna. So especially in a bulky muscular male patient, it's more challenging. It's a easy approach, reasonably easy approach in non-unions and fractures, uh, but does involve a lot of stripping of the extensors and flexors. Uh, Highly recommended to avoid if there's a flexion contracture in an arthritis patient. If previous surgeries been done, triceps has been scarred, then that's risky because that can come off. So it requires a lot of experience to be able to do that. And you also need to know your implant so that you're comfortable preparing the ulna. That requires some sleep instruments that are able to negotiate with the triceps on. Because whatever you do, the triceps has to be worshipped and respected. Uh, Often you have a rheumatoid patient who's 75, 80. The triceps is of very poor quality as it is, and in revision surgery you have to be extremely careful. If allowed, now this is a elderly lady, she's 70 years old. I have, when permitted, done an osteoperical flap. So I take a bone flake off the triceps so that the muscle is not involved, and then the bone to bone union is likely to be better. If you look closely on the x-ray, I've done a repair with the flake back on, and it sits anatomically like a hairline reduction. you have to be careful that you don't violate the upper olecranon. And I don't think we can do this for all the osteoporotic or the rheumatoid patients. The one patient that Ram showed who was a rheumatoid with a fracture, her ulna was almost thinned out completely, and you don't want to break the olecranon here. So these are the old generation processes that are available. They weaken out. So you need a proper evaluated processes that's linked and you're comfortable using. Like what Ram showed, it's important that I do a examination and an anesthesia so that I understand what is the kind of instability. And when you have biplanar instability, that means it's going to be mighty lax. You have to be very careful that you can restore stability to this joint. And finding the center of rotation is critical because that's where things can go pear-shaped. I get maximum grief dealing with the ulna. So you need good instrumentation to be able to. If you get flexible reamers, these are, I think the Nexel set has flexible reamers. The Conrad More native set doesn't have flexible reamers. It makes life hugely easy, hugely easy. But if you don't, then I, as a rule, even with a primary case, will always use a CM. Because as Ram alluded to, you don't want a stem that has created a double canal outside. Um, when I'm preparing the humerus, I don't put the trial stem completely inside. I measure the amount that's outside so that I know that that much is going to go in, because especially in old revision patients, you can end up shattering the humerus as well. And the biggest challenge in preparing the small ulna, which is absolutely minuscule in some of these petite ladies here. So when I'm drilling, it's important to create a nice opening with a proper burr which has a good control. So this is a neuro burr that we are using. It has a excellent control. I have two hands on the burr because it gives me a better control in the grip. I hold it very close to the lower part of the handle so that I have a short lever arm. And you would open the canal much more anteriorly rather than posteriorly so that you don't explode the ulna. So these are the two crucial steps in preparation that has saved me embarrassment as such. We need lots of releases, especially of the lateral anterior capsule. With the link processes, you can just do away with the collaterals. It helps you open the world for you. And of course, the intermuscular septum. It's immaterial if the triceps is on, but the anconeus can be a helpful adjunct to uh, increase the exposure. The ulnar nerve can be a challenge. Most of the times, I don't transpose it unless it's required, unless it's under a lot of pressure. I do an extensive release superiorly and inferiorly, and I use a sloop. But I think Sean Driscoll has a lot of out-of-the-box work on the ulnar nerve. And last time we met at Argentina at the ICSC meeting, he had another presentation said, don't put your artery forceps on the sloop. It just puts a focal pressure on the ulnar nerve. So I've had a couple of patients postoperatively, although I prepared the ulnar nerve, they came back with a mild ulnar nerve palsy, which took 6 to 8 weeks to recover. It was an irritant to have ulnar nerve go off, although you've spent a lot of time mobilizing it. So since then, I just tie a knot on the sloop and leave it aside without having an artery or a weighted forceps attached to it. The getting the rotation right is always challenging, difficult on the table, often in obese patients, in patients who have deformity. And so it's important that you don't get friction or you don't have a mismatch between the rotation between the humerus and ulna. Be mighty embarrassing if the two don't link together. So as a safety precaution right from day one, I cement both the humeral and ulnar stems simultaneously and lock the pin in and then hammer the humerus in and then put the elbow through several motions. So that way it can't go wrong. The set while the cement is setting, it will find its own sweet spot and you can get the center of rotation correct. If you're cementing them separately and in theaters that don't have a good air conditioning, if the cement sets very early, it can be extremely embarrassing to have a wrong rotation on the humerus and ulna, which doesn't match up in a linked prosthesis. Do use a CM. I use that very often. Whether you do it in a prone, lateral, or supine is entirely your calling. I prefer the lateral position, uh, but you can use a supine position sometimes when the anesthetist is unhappy in a very elderly lady. Ensure there's no pistoning when you're doing your trial reduction. I invest a lot of effort and time on the trial reductions, and until I'm happy and satisfied, I will not go in to do my final uh, insertion. But this is one point here, that if after doing a complete flexion, if your prosthesis is impinging against the coronoid, feel free to take the anterior coracoid off and do a little bit of release there, because that is what blocks flexion, and more importantly in the long term can create a loosening of the prosthesis inside uh, due to a toggle effect, and allows a center of rotation to be matched much better. As far as radial head is concerned, I would keep it intact 9 out of 10 cases. It's a good support to have, and it doesn't impinge. Often, sometimes if it's deformed, then I would just trim with a nibbler and shape it up a little bit. And in future, you can always use that in case there's a revision come up. It's an excellent bone graft for you in the revision cases. There is always a challenge. I counsel all my patients that you might lose that last 10, 15 degrees of extension. And that deficit is not harmful. It doesn't obstruct the ADLs, but it's very unnerving after achieving a full extension on table. So the on table extension may not match up with the post op extension. Like Ram, I actually keep the arm in extension for about 48 hours, then remove the drain and the slab, and then start early mobilization in most patients. To achieve extension deficit, to ensure you don't get an extension deficit, I usually recess the humeral implant to gain complete extension. And if you get a flexion deficit, sorry, correction. If you get an extension deficit during trial reduction, it is not going to correct with time, with movement. It is going to only get worse. So do your releases, get your corrections, ensure it sits out flat and complete zero extension on table itself without getting hyperextension. You might have overstuffed. Invariably, in the Indian patients, we use extra small implants as well. Uh, the closure requires a lot of diligence. If you've done the Mia approach, then I usually do crisscross 3 sutures, number 2 ethibond, but I use a circumferential suture in addition to give a orthogonal closure, because I do start rehab very early. So it's important to be diligent, have a robust kind of repair. Ethibond pre-drill, ensure it's not damaging the cement mantle on the ulnar side, and ensure there are no knots on the ulnar surface, because that can be very irritating. Patients can feel that, and they can have a great movement, but they keep cribbing about the knots being fed under the biggest problem in India is these patients come in too late after a lot of damage done. This is a young lady, 45. She's had 4 surgeries on her elbow, and she's come to me after almost 2 years. And in this situation now, there's nothing here to salvage. We've done an elbow replacement on her, but these are the kind of patients who come in so late. Pre-op, I need to know that they have had 4 surgeries to ensure that their triceps is functioning. But with a flexion deficit, it's very difficult to evaluate whether triceps. So often, if I'm not sure that clinically we can assess that, I will do an ultrasound to ensure there's no fatty infiltration wasting, because that's the best way to ensure that triceps is functioning. And more importantly, we do a dynamic recruitment on the ultrasound to ensure that the triceps is functioning, because we've had a patient who's had a 55-year contracture elbow fixed flexion after an elbow fracture, and at the age of 72 he started decompensating. Now triceps that hasn't functioned for 55 years is unlikely to function, so I need to make sure that the triceps is worth its quality before we actually endeavor doing a total elbow replacement. This is a X-ray from a colleague. She's already had 3 surgeries done, and that's a mess. It's so dealing with elbow replacement trauma, the complication rate is going to be very high, and this lady is now having cardiac issues and lots of comorbidities, and it's going to be very high risk surgery. So she's still sat out waiting to take a call on whether to revise this or not. But do be careful. Elbow replacements in trauma situation, you're dealing with very elderly patients with osteoporotic bones. So in conclusion, requires a lot of planning. Please spend more time getting your rotations correct. That is always challenging in these patients. Um, Nowadays, our rheumatoid arthritis patients are few and far in between. Most of the patients, unfortunately, are post-trauma sequelae. So those are much more complicated. A lot of scars on the elbow, triceps is wasted, coming in late. But do be careful of ulnas. I've had to do a cerclage uh, wire and repair on those fractures in 2 out of 10 patients. And complications in elbow replacements are certainly not forgiving. Thank you. Thank you.